Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have an unboxing of the Xiaomi MIX Flip. Let's get started. This is the first folding device in vertical format from this company, so let's see what it has to offer. First, let's take the device out of its box, which fortunately we can see is a thick box, unlike the vast majority of devices that do not include a charger in the high end. So we can anticipate that it will indeed have a charger, but join me in taking it out of its box. But first I tell you its price. In Mexico it has been launched at 26,999 pesos. On screen you see the reference price in dollars, but at least here in Mexico it is more expensive than the Galaxy Z Flip 6 and the Oppo Find N3 Flip, which would be two of the main competing foldable in this format. So it is curious to see a higher proposal in price, although in this case we are talking about 512 gigabytes. So if you compare it to the 256 version of the Galaxy Z Flip 6, it would be cheaper. Maybe it would have been interesting to see an edition with a little less storage cheaper, but that's the decision they've made. Now yes, let's take it out of its box. And first we find this little box, which at the same time is like an envelope, where we will find the tool to remove the SIM card tray. We are also going to find the usual paper, and the very good news is that it includes a case. Note that in this case it is a case that comes in two pieces, as is the case with all folding phones of this style. And also in the part of the case that is thinner, it comes with these stickers that we must remove to stick this case with the device. Personally, I don't like it so much because if you want to change the case, it's going to be very complicated to try to peel off the case that you once installed. But it's the same with all foldables. It's not something particular to Xiaomi. The other piece of the case comes without adhesives. It looks like this one will be much easier to swap out. I like that it's a holster with color, possibly the same color as the device, which in this case is purple. Unlike other cases that might be transparent, which then turn yellow, so the case is very nice. In fact, it's appreciated that it comes with an integrated case, because in the high end we usually see very simple cases, but in this case, as I tell you, it comes with a good initial content. But let's see what's next. We met directly with the device, and in this protection comes some of its main features. For example, the 4-inch external display. Both displays have HyperOS, Leica Sumilux lenses, specially designed for this device. It also has this multi-angle option for photography. Being a flip, it supports being semi-folded in different positions. It also has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 processor and the 67 watts charging with a good battery. The truth is that for a foldable, it comes with very good specifications. So here we have the device, and as a first impression, what I noticed different with respect to other foldables that I have had in my hands is this area. It's curious because Xiaomi has decided to incorporate a glass with 4 curvatures. So it feels like a very premium block of glass, but completely separate from the other piece, unlike other foldables that give a slightly straighter feel in the hinge area when the device is unfolded. It's not a good or bad thing, it just feels different. It gives much more of a two-piece feel than other foldables that when unfolded seem to be one piece. So that's a curious little fact about this Xiaomi device, that on its hinge it brings the Leica logo, interestingly enough, instead of the Xiaomi logo. With that, it's pretty clear that it's a foldable that could focus a lot on photography. But let's get it powered up and see what else comes in the box as this device finishes powering up. And well, we're talking about the 67 watt charger with its respective cable that comes from USB-A to USB-C. In this case, I have a European charger because it is a unit simply for review. But as I say, depending on the region where you buy your device, the charger should come well adapted if you buy it with official distribution. That's the contents of the box. Let me put everything away and we'll focus on the specifications of this device. And that's it. I've got the device set up here in my hand so we can take a look at its specs. When unfolded, it's 7.8 millimeters thick, Folded, it measures 15.99 millimeters thick. Its weight is 192 grams. Let's say it's not the lightest device, but you have to understand that it has a hinge and it's much more complex to make a foldable device, so it's okay in that sense. The external display is 4.01-inch AMOLED with 1.5K resolution, to be exact 1392 by 1208 pixels. It peaks up to 3000 nits viewing HDR content and 1600 nits overall, and is protected by Xiaomi's Dragon Crystal glass. As I tell you, the fact of having 4 curvatures could give you the feeling that it is a relatively fragile device, but I think it is good that the manufacturer incorporates its own technology instead of falling back on the development of some others. With respect to the internal display, we find a 6.86-inch diagonal, quite large, also with 1.5K resolution, 2912 by 1224 pixels. It has 120 Hz in its refresh rate, just like the external display. And just as you suspected, it supports HDR and Dolby Vision content. Fortunately, it does integrate stereo sound with a speaker on the bottom and another speaker in the earpiece area for calling. By the way, it also integrates infrared for universal remote control, a rare addition in the high end of several brands. And seeing it in a foldable, the truth is that it draws a lot of attention, because usually foldables try to save space and remove several elements, but here they kept the infrared, which I think is a hallmark of many Xiaomi devices. The front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.4 aperture and fixed focus. In other words, on paper, the specs are pretty straightforward. While it has a good sensor with a lot of resolution, generally these sensors have very small pixels, so they capture little light, and if you combine it with a relatively closed aperture, even less light comes in, and having fixed focus also ends up spoiling the experience a bit. On screen, you are seeing the comparison of the capture before taking the picture and after. In this scenario where there is a lot of lighting, I think the result is still positive, but it still doesn't look like it's going to have an exaggeratedly good front camera. In fact, no foldable in this form factor has a very attractive front camera, and I think the basic explanation is that you have the ability to use the main system to take selfies, so you gain a lot of quality with these cameras. In this case, Xiaomi's bet is to incorporate main camera and telephoto camera, so it does not integrate ultra-wide camera. The main camera is 50 megapixels with f1.7 aperture and autofocus and optical stabilization. The telephoto also has 50 megapixels, 2x optical zoom, and has f2.0 aperture. First, you have to understand that a telephoto will do well for portraits. It doesn't mean it's going to have a long-range zoom or anything like that, but I think it can really stand out in portraits. Let me know in the comments if you prefer the second camera to be telephoto or if you prefer it to be an ultra-wide. Generally, I think content creators prefer the ultra-wide to be able to shoot with a very wide angle, but for photographers, the telephoto is much more interesting. In fact, look at how cropping the sensor can also give us portraits at different focal lengths, 23mm, 35mm, 50mm, or even 75mm. But let's take a look at the results of this photograph. At 23mm, I wasn't able to recognize the object in my hand very well. In fact, not even my hand. It looks like he had some complications there. At 35mm, we see a very good level of detail. That's positive, but it's still getting complicated in terms of detecting the object. At least my hand already detected it. At the 50mm setting, we see exactly the same behavior, which is quite curious. And at the 75mm setting is where we're finally going to see that it did detect the object. In fact, the perspective is much more professional, although it doesn't have as much level of detail as we found in the past settings. One element that I really like is that the display supports this type of HDR photography. That is, brighter areas in real life are also going to cast more brightness on the screen. It's not a general brightness, but specific areas are able to emit more brightness. It's very complicated to show you this through the camera, but when you see it in real life, it's going to be a piece of information that you're going to really like. So, this is the main camera. I really like the image quality that it gives us. Since Xiaomi is working with Leica, the shadows are a little bit more pronounced to give this real shadow feeling without going completely dark. I like the overall result. Now you're looking at the telephoto camera, which obviously retains a very similar color rendition and gives us very good image quality. Next, you're looking at the photograph with a 4x zoom, where it should apply a crop on the sensor or something, but you start to notice a little bit that it's digital zoom. I think up to this point we would still be talking about very good zoom quality. However, then you're looking at 10x's of zoom and it obviously looks good, but you can tell it's digital zoom, especially if you zoom in a little bit more because the level of detail is noticeably low. The maximum zoom is 20x and it doesn't seem to have as much artificial intelligence optimization or similar things as what other manufacturers do to improve detail. So I insist the maximum zoom range is not so remarkable despite incorporating a telephoto camera. That was just a small glimpse of these cameras and their performance in portrait photography. In the review we will have a little more detailed analysis because as a first impression I still wasn't that satisfied. But for the review I insist we will do more tests. In video recording, note that in both cases we will find as maximum recording at 4K at 30 frames per second, something that I find very curious. It does not support 60 frames per second in 4K. In Full HD you can use 60 frames per second, but you have to have HDR disabled. The device also has a Master Cinema mode that will have a more professional coloring, but it doesn't allow you to zoom with the easy ring. It has to be with 2 fingers, which is rather curious. But I insist. This is hardly a first impression. In fact, note that the camera interface is indeed adapted, something that is definitely positive. You could also change the position of the viewfinder. So I think it does take advantage of the features of being a foldable, because remember that you could take pictures with this device semi-folded at some angle. And I think the hinge is of pretty good quality to maintain its position at specific angles. The battery is 4780 milliamps with 67 watt charging support. I think in both cases we see something positive, because for a foldable of this format, the battery is considered large. We'll see if it does well in testing or not, and also the charging is quite powerful, but I insist in the review we will have more accurate figures. Not just figures given by the manufacturer, but to see in real life how long it can last in terms of charging time and battery life. We'll find 12 GB of RAM with 512 GB of storage. When I just turned it on without having installed anything, it had 500 GB still available. Because you notice it has a little bit of a strange technology, which is 512 plus 16 gigabytes. So with different algorithms, they're able to extend another 16 gigabytes of storage. This is pretty interesting. Maybe it does some weird compression. So it doesn't give you 512, it gives you more storage than 512. So on the storage and the RAM, I think it's got plenty. And finally, the processor is the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, a processor that is undoubtedly very good, although it is not the most powerful of today, but it is one of the most powerful. For reference, here are the results in Geekbench. 2,156 points on a single core, it is extremely powerful. And in multi-core, 6,431, which is quite high. Although the current generation of processors from both Snapdragon and MediaTek far surpassed the last generation, so it doesn't feel as powerful. But there is definitely power to spare here. In Antutu it scored 1,825,153 points, so those are pretty much the numbers for this device. But we'll have the full review coming soon so you can get to know it in more depth. Note that on the external display we could indeed run traditional format applications, as it will opt for a more or less vertical layout, placing a widget in the gap area so that applications can be more easily adapted. Although of course the cameras use a very good part of this screen, and notice how the widget that is filling the gap also adapts depending on whether you are using an app with a light shade or a dark shade. I insist that soon I will tell you more details about this device. For the moment we have reached the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can tell me about it, and we'll see you next time.